NATO. Humanitarian intervention in Yugoslavia, 25 years since the start of the ordeal that killed thousands. The merging of politics and humanitarianism in the wake of ethnic conflict in the Kosovo region. In this presentation, I shall look into the bombing campaigns by NATO against Serbia in 1999 and how they relate to medical anthropology in the ways it represents a key example of humanitarian intervention, global metrics, and environmental degradation in regards to the health and livelihoods of Albanians and Serbians living in the Kosovo region. Written by Kristina Glaskova for the Russian state-owned news outlet Sputnik, this piece was written for the anniversary of the bombing campaigns led by NATO from March to May 1999. The Kosovo Wars stemmed from the escalating tensions between the ethnic Albanians, who comprised the majority of Kosovo's population, and the Yugoslav government led by President Slobodan Milosevic. The Yugoslav government's repression of Albanian Kosovars, including discriminatory policies and widespread human rights abuses, sparked an armed insurgency by Kosovo Liberation Army, or the KLA, in the late 90s. The conflict quickly escalated into a full-scale war characterized by brutal violence and ethnic cleansing. As the humanitarian crisis in Kosovo deepened with reports of massacres, forced displacement, and systemic rape, the international community faced mounting pressure to intervene. Diplomatic efforts to resolve the crisis through negotiations led by the United States and the European Union failed to yield a peaceful resolution. With diplomatic options exhausted and the humanitarian situation deteriorated rapidly, NATO launched Operation Allied Force. The primary objective of NATO's operation was to halt the ethnic cleansing campaign carried out by Yugoslav forces and compel Milosevic to withdraw his troops from Kosovo. NATO airstrikes targeted Yugoslav military and its strategic infrastructure, including government buildings, military installations, and communication networks. The campaign aimed to degrade Yugoslav's military capabilities and pressure Milosevic to comply with NATO's demands. The bombings were controversial from the outset. It sparked debate over the legitimacy of military intervention without explicit authorization from the United Nations Security Council. While NATO invoked humanitarian concerns and the principle of the responsibility to protect to justify its actions, critics argued that the intervention violated international law and undermined the principle of state sovereignty. The bombings also had significant humanitarian consequences, causing civilian casualties and widespread destruction of infrastructure, including schools, hospitals, and residential areas. NATO airstrikes inadvertently targeted civilian areas, leading to allegations of war crimes and violations of international humanitarian law. Moreover, the bombings exacerbated the humanitarian crisis in Kosovo, triggering a massive wave of displacement as civilians fled their homes to escape the violence. After the war, NATO and its members would form KFOR as a means to keep peace in the region after Serbia pulled out and Slobodan's government collapsed. While the article is written from the bias of the Russian state due to its relationship with Serbia and the ongoing war occurring in Ukraine, it is obvious to see a complete lack of acknowledgement of the bombings from Western outlets, writing on the 25th anniversary, with either a small mention or none at all. Meanwhile, outlets that are against NATO or supportive of powers like China and Russia have written pieces covering the reasons for NATO's involvement and the list of potential war crimes that were committed. We can then see the way in which humanitarian intervention is still used as political even decades after the initial operation, with political blocs using the event as propaganda engagement. Humanitarian Reason, A Moral History of the Present by Didier Fassin delves into the evolving role of humanitarianism in international conflicts, shedding light on the intersection of politics and humanitarian action. The text emphasizes the shift towards humanitarian language being mobilized at the core of military operations, marking a transition where humanitarianism becomes a dominant frame of reference for Western political intervention worldwide. It highlights the merging of humanitarianism and politics, with humanitarianism being viewed as a form of political thought in itself. Additionally, the document discusses the unequal treatment and protection of expatriate and national staff in humanitarian organizations, shedding light on the inherent hierarchy and inequality present in such operations. The book highlights the inequality introduced by the humanitarian gesture in terms of risk and obligation by discussing the asymmetry of lives between those whose lives may be at risk, the humanitarian workers, and those whose lives are at risk, the people on whose behalf they intervene. It also delves into the distinction between those who come from far to render assistance and those who enable them to achieve this task, establishing a hierarchy of status and levels of protection between the two. This creates implicit hierarchies and introduces a form of inequality within humanitarian action. The book also discusses the unequal value accorded to the lives on the battlefield, with the lives of Western forces of intervention being valued over the sacrificed lives of enemy troops and civilian populations. Ultimately, the book emphasizes the ethical and moral implications of these dual inequalities within the humanitarian gesture. In Yugoslavia, this dual inequality would be between the NATO forces of the US, Britain, the Netherlands, and so forth, and the lives of local populations of Kosovar Albanians and Kosovar Serbians. For Kane Adams in Metrics, What Counts in Global Health highlights the political, economic, and social implications of utilizing metrics to measure health outcomes. The book underscores tensions and complexities that arise when metrics become intertwined with governance, finance, and profit-driven solutions in the global health sector. Additionally, it explores the limitations and opportunities presented by the demands for metrics, shedding light on the ways in which individuals and organizations navigate the pressure to align with quantitative outcomes while preserving their unique approaches to healthcare and intervention. The main economic effect of the bombing campaigns in Kosovo and Serbia was the immediate crash in the Yugoslav dinar, with the after effects of this being a lack of essential goods in general stores and a difficulty in procuring high-value items like medical supplies and sanitation products. This in turn led to the rise of scalping in the regions of the country that lacked certain goods, a practice wherein people buy up newly marketed items with the intention to profit off the high demand of said item. In terms of global metrics, the intervention of NATO into an already existing conflict zone led to an inability for people to gain access to what is essential, in turn leading to the decrease in the overall livelihood of individuals who had been reduced by the humanitarian intervention of Western powers into a civilian population, while Adams' work focuses on the metrics in regards to hospitals or NGO environments. The metrics in terms of NATO, in the case of the Yugoslav bombings, is in the way that they saw the casualties and the after effects of the bombings as second to their main objective, which was to bring an end to the ethnic cleansing of Kosovar Albanians, no matter the cost. Moving on. The text Haunted Landscapes of the Anthropocene delves into the concept of the Anthropocene and proposed geological epoch marked by human influence on Earth's livability. It emphasizes the haunting traces of human and non-human histories, highlighting the impact of human disturbances on the planet's ecosystems. It emphasizes the presence of ghosts and the vestiges of past ways of life that still linger in the present. The authors explore the concepts of haunting, where landscapes are portrayed as haunted by both human and non-human histories, emphasizing the impact of human disturbances on the planet's ecosystem. This haunting can be seen all over the former Yugoslav region in the remains of bombed-out buildings right next to newly built pristine ones, such as here, or with the bullet holes that litter the walls of so many villages and urban centres to this very day. However, more insidious ramifications of the bombings lay in the very ground of Kosovo and has become an unseen revenant in the haunting of the region. In Arts of Living on a Damaged Planet, they explore the uncanny and eerie qualities of ruined landscapes, such as the presence of human-made radiocesium, which travels in the water and soil, getting inside plants and animals. As mentioned in Glasgow's article, the effects of depleted uranium in Kosovo can be felt up until today, with cases of leukemia being abnormally high for both Serbs and Kosovar Albanians living in or near the region, despite claims by NATO and Western authorities on the impacts of depleted uranium. Depleted uranium is used in ammunition with the intention to penetrate materials that conventional arms cannot. Depleted uranium was used in the rounds of American A-10 Warthogs, which are believed to have penetrated the surface soil, poisoning groundwater supplies in Kosovo and Serbia. This has become the leading theory for the abnormal levels of cancer cases in Kosovo. In Iraq, depleted uranium was used more extensively during the Gulf War in 1991 and the Iraq War in 2003. The widespread use of depleted uranium munitions in Iraq has been linked to a range of health problems among Iraqi civilians and military personnel, including increased rates of cancer, birth defects, and other illnesses. The use of depleted uranium in Iraq has also led to the environmental contamination and concerns about the long-term consequences for public health and safety, similarly to the way that the aircraft rounds and penetrated groundwater reservoirs in Kosovo. A further example of this human impact is in the remnants of unexploded ordnance in the region. Cluster bombs, already illegal to use under international law, litter the countryside of Kosovo, and up until this day have caused severe injury and death for those unfortunate enough to be in the radius of one that is disturbed. The Kosovo bombings remain a subject of debate and scrutiny up until this very day. They reflect the complex and ethical dilemma inherent in humanitarian intervention. While the intervention and bombing campaign succeeded in averting further bloodshed and protecting civilians in Kosovo, it also raised important questions about the use of force in international affairs and the balance between sovereignty and humanitarian concern. The concept of humanitarian action has become a dominant frame of reference for Western political intervention in scenes of misfortune throughout the world due to the emergence of a phenomenon over the past 2 decades. And while the bombing campaign helped in ending the war in Kosovo, the ethnic tensions, cleansings, and months-long bombing runs weighs heavily on the minds of the people to this very day, with further effects on the population through the physical ailments of unexploded ordnance and depleted uranium. Not only this, but the use of the war as a political tool within the context of modern conflicts that are currently ongoing, such as in Ukraine, with the article itself that this piece used being a piece of Russian propaganda in the slating of NATO actions, hearkening the current conflicts to the failings of NATO command in 1999.